So this morning we are hosting the workshop for the City of Harrisburg's Community Development Block Grant Program, as well as the Emergency Solutions Block Grant. Both of these programs come through annual allocations from the federal government through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. We anticipate the following amounts being available for outside applications. 1.3 million for CDBG funds and just under 300,000, 283,000 in emergency solutions grants. For those of you that might not have applied before or received these funds, it's worth noting here at the beginning, these are reimbursement grants, which means your organization might be approved for an amount of grant. The programs that will be running, the funding will be awarded in the fall, typically around October. And then you'll be able to seek reimbursement on a monthly basis for cost incurred to run these various programs that you might be applying for assistance. So you would have to document your expenses for the program throughout the month, and then submit a reimbursement request at the beginning of the next month. So it's worth noting, part of the reason we ask for such significant details in your financial statements is to make sure that everybody has the ability to run these programs on a reimbursement basis. The link here on the PowerPoint will take you to the Building and Housing Department, which I assume you've all found already, but this is where the information will be posted, and I'll share that link again at the end of the presentation. So for those of you that might not be familiar with the two programs, the Community Development Block Grant Program is a 50-year-old program being allocated again through annual budget from the federal government and allocated through HUD. The city has received funding for almost 50 years now throughout this program. The Community Development Block Grant is our largest grant of the three that we receive from HUD, and it's our most flexible grant. The city makes available funding for two different categories for nonprofits.
Yes.
The first is to improve your public facility. So if you own your facility, whether it's a community center or some other type of recreational facility, neighborhood center, etc., that is open.
And if there's extreme weather, the Plains Council.
Hi, good morning. If someone's can everyone make sure we're on mute, please?
We can. I mean, that happens all the time.
Lori, you're not on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Okay, so sorry, the Community Development Block Grant Program, we're making available two categories of eligible uses for nonprofit applications. The first is the public facility improvement. So if your organization owns your facility and it's in need of repairs or improvements, you can apply for funding to actually conduct those renovations or repairs. So that could be improving, paving your parking lot if it's in disrepair, replacing the roof, interior modifications, etc. This is not for furnishing, so it actually has to be rehabilitation. We can't pay for equipment in the facility, but physical improvements to the structure. The second category is public services. This is the most prescribed program from nonprofits. Note that the city is limited to 15% of our annual allocation for public services. So we do have a limit built in to that available funding. So public services is for your programmatic operations. This typically helps out with staff salaries or program materials to help you run a wide variety of social service type programs for low to moderate income individuals here in Harrisburg. The second grant is much more specific and a smaller allocation each year, the Emergency Solutions Grant. This is all related to addressing homelessness in Harrisburg. So we can use funds to help households that are currently experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. So typical uses of these funds are street outreach, where you might send program staff out to assist people literally homeless, provide operations for emergency homeless shelters, rapid rehousing, which is case management and typically rental assistance for people that are maybe in the shelter or currently homeless. And then homeless prevention, which is typically, again, case management and rental assistance to avoid eviction. So for our program guidelines, the eligible applicants here, you have to be a public nonprofit or a private nonprofit entity. You must be able to document that you're in good standing with the federal government, state of Pennsylvania, and of course the city of Harrisburg. The minimum funding request is $20,000. There's no maximum, but note that on the previous page, we have about 1.3 million in CDBG funding to spread amongst the organizations and 283,000 in ESG. So not likely that any one organization would receive the majority of those funds. So just keep that in mind. We're not an advertised maximum, but the minimum is 20,000. I'll share with you the application and our scoring sheet. We feel like the application scoring is very objective, makes it very clear what you can expect to score. So it's out of 100 points possible, and each application to be eligible, you must be able to achieve a minimum score of 75. I'll show you again the application and how each question is scored as we go through the presentation. You can apply for both CDBG and ESG, and you can apply within those programs for different eligible uses. Your organization might operate multiple programs. You can apply for multiple awards, but you need to submit a complete application for each program or each funding source that you might be seeking. We have different people that might review different applications, so it's important that the full application is submitted for each request. So the application materials will be posted again on the city's website tomorrow, following our afternoon session here today. And then you'll have roughly 1 month to submit, and I'll show you the submission instructions here momentarily. So at this point, I'm going to change the share over to the PDF, the application itself. If you give me just a moment to stop the share. Okay, so the application itself is a fillable PDF. You can see that the applications are going to be due by 5 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, August 22nd. So roughly a month from today. I'm going to scroll through the application. I won't read every single question for you, but here are instructions on page 2 here. I'm going to point out multiple times in this session that here is an email address for the department where you're going to submit your applications. And between now and the time that there's submission, that you do submit, you can also submit questions to this email box. All questions will be reviewed and answered on essentially an FAQ type document, and we'll be posting those to the website each week as we have new questions and responses. You cannot contact staff directly during this time. There's a cone of silence, if you will, during the application process. So staff will have to direct you to this generic inbox for any questions. That way, everybody that is potentially applying has the benefit of both the question and answer in an equitable manner. So here's some details about the application criteria. I'm going to go over the conflict of interest here momentarily, but I want to point out the city's priority needs as it's identified in our 5-year consolidated plan. If you're not familiar with our consolidated plan, this is our 5-year document that guides how we will fund and our priorities for using these HUD funds for that 5-year period. The 2023 to 2027 consolidated plan is on the city's website. For those of you that might be considering CDBG funds for construction or renovation at your public facility, I really encourage you to review these items here related to Davis-Bacon, Section 3, and Build America, Buy America Act. These are all construction-related requirements that will need to be enforced in your project should you seek funding for facility improvements. Won't go through those necessarily today, but I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation where you can find additional resources online to help you walk through this. If you're awarded funds, staff will of course work with you to make sure that there are compliance throughout, but I encourage you to quite frankly, to know what you're getting into asking for federal funds. So here's some details about the review process of the applications. You can see that there's essentially 4 sections of the application. You'll start with the project description, and those questions combined are worth 25 points. Then you'll have an agency summary where you're describing the capacity of your organization. That's worth 30 points. Your financial management, your internal controls, essentially for how your organization manages financing, is worth another 30 points. And then finally, the statement of need, where you identify why this should be a priority for the city of Harrisburg, is worth 15 points. Again, we have objective scoring for each question. I'll show you the scoring rubric a little bit later, but you can see what point value for each question. And in most cases, you can see based on the answer selected, how many points you would receive. Okay, so getting through, I'm going to expand this required attachments here, and I'll share this again. But in addition to the application, there's going to be, of course, a budget worksheet, which we'll go through. There's a required resolution from your board of directors authorizing the application of the funds and use of the funds from the city of Harrisburg. We require this because we really want your board to be aware of the requirements for these funds. We also need your board to acknowledge any potential conflicts of interest that they might have with city employees or elected officials. But really, most importantly, we want your board to be aware of your signing up for these grants and the compliance and reporting that is required here. You'll include an organizational chart with your employee names and titles, and a list of all current or proposed staff name and titles that are going to be associated with the program. So we want your full org chart, but then point out clearly to us who's going to be running the program. We need job descriptions and pay scales for your executive director, your fiscal officer, program administration, and program staff as it might be applicable to your organization, and any other proposed positions to be funded with these grants. We need resumes from some of your staff as well. You can see the list there: executive director, fiscal officer, program staff, and certifications that might be necessary. Some of you might be applying for very specialized funding for counseling or different social work that requires certification or licensing. If that's the case, then we need copies of those certifications or licensing. We want resumes for those key staff as well, a list of all your current board members, and then a conflict of interest disclosure forms for all of your board members, all of your executive management and program staff associated with this program. We have a new form that the City Law Bureau has prepared. I'll go through that momentarily. But this is a required form, again, for all board members, all executive staff, and any program staff that will be involved in the delivery of this funded program. We need year-to-date financial statements and your most recent certified audit. If there were any conditions in your audit, we need your management letter and your agency's response clearing those items. We need your organizational bylaws, your 501c3 nonprofit status, your articles of incorporation filed with the Secretary of State here in Pennsylvania. For those of you applying for ESG funds, you'll need a letter of endorsement from CAS, the Capital Area Council on Homelessness. That's our Continuum of Care, or COC. That's only relevant for ESG applicants. If you're not familiar with CAS, then not to be rude, but you're probably not eligible to receive ESG funds, given that's very specific and unique nature of those programs. You have to be able to provide proof of liability coverage. You have to have coverage at the time of the application. If you're awarded funds, you'll also have to list the city of Harrisburg as an additional insured. Your organization has to be registered with sam.gov. That's a requirement for receiving any federal funds. If you're not familiar with sam.gov, I encourage you to find that website today and start your organization's registration immediately. We'll need to see that you have at least submitted your registration before we can consider your application. And we'll need to see that that registration is completed before we can award funds. For those of you that are seeking funds or might seek funds for construction, you'll have to procure your contractors and they will have to be registered with sam.gov. So that's something to take into consideration here. And then, as Ms. Gloria said in her introduction, we will provide a certificate of attendance for your organization for today's workshop or the August 6th workshop, whichever is relevant. Again, you only need one person from your organization to attend. We just want everybody to hear this information and hear this presentation. So it's not necessary that literally every individual from your organization gets their certificate. Just proof that one was in attendance will suffice. Okay, and now into the actual application questions itself. Starts on page 7 of this PDF. Some pretty obvious stuff here about your organization. You'll get this unique entity identifier, or UEI, from sam.gov. And we'll be checking your debarment status or suspension status on sam.gov. So that's part of the reason we have to make sure that everybody is registered, because we're required to check for debarment of all federal programs. You'll identify the primary contact should we have questions about your application. That might be the same person as your director. That's fine. But in the event that you have someone else that's sort of your grant writer or grant coordinator, include them here in the information. And some of you might be, excuse me, offering programs at a different address. That's acceptable. We realize there's some organizations that have different locations around the state or around the region where they might be headquartered. That is acceptable. We just need to be able to document that your program is going to be primarily benefiting low to moderate income individuals here in Harrisburg. Your offices do not have to be physically located in Harrisburg, but you'll have to be able to prove how you're primarily serving our residents. Okay, and then the first scoring questions begin here on page 8. Question number 1, your project description. You can see that each of these questions will have a point value, and then it gives you a prompt. So for example, this one, provide a detailed description of your proposed project. Pretty straightforward. This should include a summary of the project and the objectives that the agency or organization will accomplish during the program year. So again, typically these awards will be for a 12-month period. In some cases, they may be longer, but typically we're doing a 12-month period of performance. And again, we anticipate executing these agreements in October. So if you want to project a year out from October through September of 2025. Just a word of advice, as a scorer of your applications, what I would recommend you do is read all of the questions before you start preparing any one particular answer. You want to make sure that You're very specific in the answers of each question. You don't want to have duplicate narratives where you're trying to use the same statement to answer multiple questions. That's not going to maximize your score. So be very specific and detailed and answer each question. You'll also see that for most of these narrative boxes, there's a maximum word count. We're not looking for, long essays here. We're looking for you to be efficient and to the point. Again, I won't read every question for you, but I'm just going to kind of scroll through here the sections. Many of the questions wind up being sort of a multiple choice. I'll point out here that on question 2, for example, is only relevant for CDBG applicants. So you would select whether you're applying for public facilities or public services. And then if you were applying for public services, who are the primary beneficiaries of your proposed program? Again, at a minimum, under CDBG, your primary beneficiaries have to be low to moderate income individuals or households here in Harrisburg. But if you're serving special needs populations, victims of abuse, or homeless individuals and families, those are specific categories under CDBG as well. Then question 4, there's specific questions for ESG applicants only. Note that there are several items that are threshold criteria. We've noted this in red. Again, ESG is a very specific program that requires participation in the continuum of care, the Capital Area Council on Homelessness, and specific criteria on reporting and how your program is managed. So if you're applying for ESG, I'd encourage you to look at question 4 and make sure you can meet these threshold criteria before going too far. And then again, I'll point out that you're required to have a project-specific endorsement from CAST, Continuum of Care, to include in your application. Then as we move down the agency summary here section, you begin to start approving or preparing narratives specific to your organizational staff. And note that here we're looking for specific professional expertise from the relevant program staff that'll be implementing this project. And again, reminder that resumes would be required for staff you're proposing here. You can see as we get to some of these other questions, like question 7 about your agency summary, select the response that best describes the project manager's years of relevant experience managing programs and services, so that you can see how each point or each option will score differently. And then a few more narratives here on agency summary. And then you get into, on question 13, the financial management section. So this is where we're looking for specific controls around your financial management, your bookkeeping, accounting processes, your internal controls, how financing are managed. For those of you that might not have applied for federal funds before, the Federal Register or the federal regulations, it's called 2 CFR 200. And these are where specific criteria or requirements for managing federal funds are listed in the federal regulations. We've got that cited here. We want you to specifically speak to those criteria and acknowledge that your organization is aware of those requirements and has the capacity and policies and procedures in place to manage compliance with the federal regulations. So again, then there's a few multiple choice type questions in the financial management section. I'll point out question 17 to you, where we're asking about matching funds. This is for all applications. I'll point out that ESG requires a dollar for dollar match. You have to match 100%. So if you're requesting $25,000 in ESG funding, your organization has got to provide matching funds for at least $25,000 as well. We'll require you to document the source of the matching funds in your budget. And then each month as you seek reimbursement, you'll have to be able to prove how those matching funds were utilized each month. So on CDBG, though, it's not required to match. So it is only related to scoring. So for ESG folks, you're essentially going to max out this score here with 5 points on this question because it's required to match 100%. For CDBG, you get the most points for matching your request with at least 25% matching funds from other sources. Again, one more narrative here on financial management, describing those internal controls and separation of duties. Again, referencing 2 CFR 200 requirements. And then finally on question 19, we get to the statement of need, where you're describing the community problem or the need to be addressed by your project. Why is this urgent? Why should the city fund this? Given in the very limited nature of these funds, why should this be a priority for CDBG or ESG funding? And then a last multiple choice questions here, again, pointing out CDBG applicants only, and then ESG applicants only. So make sure you're addressing the proper questions. And then the last question, 21, ask if you're only able to receive partial funding, how would you adjust the program design or utilize other funding to fill in the gap? So unfortunately, we're very likely to receive more requests for funding than we have available to award. So in the event that the city needs to make reductions in the request, how will you respond? You might, frankly, if you're applying for construction funding, you might say, hey, without full funding, we can't do the project. But on other programs, it might be more appropriate that you would scale back. You would only be able to offer programs on a more limited nature. You describe how that would impact you, so we can take that into consideration. Then your executive director should sign the bottom of the application here. And again, you'll have a board resolution to accompany your application. In the PDF, there's a sample budget form. I'm going to go to the Excel form here momentarily, but very simply, it's just a spreadsheet. What we're looking for in this budget is the description of whatever your program might be. We're looking for all of the expenses that your organization incurs to run that program for that time period. So again, October to September. In this example, it's that total project cost is $110,000 for this sample organization. They are requesting $60,000 and they're allocating those CDBG funds to these various line items here. And actually this is probably an ESG sample given the rental assistance, utility, and security. But this is how the funds would be used. And then they're showing where the match or other funds donated or in kind will be used as well to come up with the total budget. And then you see at the top of the spreadsheet here, it's summarizing all of the sources of your funds, confirming that you have budget and funds available for each of the project costs. So effectively sources and uses matching. So again, we don't want you to just put how you'll use CDBG or ESG funds. We want the whole program budget and identification of other funding sources that will cover the rest of the budget. It's highly unlikely that an organization that applies for just $20,000 in CDBG and says the program costs $20,000, that's probably not very likely. That doesn't show that you've got an ongoing program that is really supported by your organization. What we're really looking to do here is to help you expand programming, offer more programming, perhaps start a new program or expand a new program that you have been working on. Or in the case of ESG, you probably have ongoing outreach and shelter operations, and these ESG funds will help you serve more clients. As I mentioned, there's a resolution required from your board. This is just a sample. You can elaborate on this resolution, but what we're looking for you to do is essentially take this narrative, put it on your letterhead, and at your board meeting this month or over the next month, have your board approve the application submission. Again, you can elaborate on this narrative, but there's not really any need to, but it does need to be on your organizational letterhead. Your board president signs and dates and provides their contact information. Okay, to the conflict of interest form. I won't read through this full conflict of interest, but we have certainly had issues with conflict of interest in the past here in Harrisburg, as it relates to organizations having board members and paid staff that are related to city council members or other city staff that might have insight or involvement into these programs. The state of Pennsylvania has very specific criteria for dealing with conflicts, as does the federal government and the city of Harrisburg, of course. So this conflict of interest form describes those criteria, identifies potential conflicts of interest. On the bottom of this first page here, we provide the federal citation for both CDBG and ESG, as well as the federal financial regulations at 200.112. And then everyone, again, all of your board members, all of your executive staff, and all of your program staff must submit this conflict of interest. This is a standardized form used for the city that has been where CDBG and ESG have been added. What you will do is just contact one. Each of your board members and staff will fill this out. If they're a board member, rather than saying they're employed, they're going to say I'm a board member. But contact two is really for the beneficiaries. We have a lot of homeowner programs that the city runs, and you might put multiple family members or household members. But so you will just fill out contact one for all of your staff and all of your board members that are involved, and then they'll answer these questions here, checking all that apply. So I am not an employee or related to anyone at the city of Harrisburg. I'm not a part of any public agencies, etc. So you will select any of these that apply. And if you do have a family or relative affiliation with the city, then you'll provide that information here. If anyone has any questions about conflict of interest or what might be a conflict that you're already identifying, we'd like you to, again, email that email box for the city's department, and I go ahead and alert the city of a potential conflict. So if you've got a board member that's a city council member, or you got a board member that's a paid staff of the city of Harrisburg, or you've got staff that are relatives of city staff or city council, or you've got people on different committees or commissions with the city, go ahead and identify those and bring those to the attention of city staff so they can begin to review your eligibility and dealing with that conflict appropriately with the Law Bureau. So attached in this PDF that you'll find is what staff and with the city and Civitas staff will use to score each application. We typically have 3 or 4 reviewers of each application. We each score the applications individually, and then we average those scores. So this is the scoring sheet that we'll use. You don't need to fill this out. This is just for reference. You see the watermark there. But yeah, I encourage you to sort of self-score. Reminder that you need to be able to score a 75 points out of 100 at a minimum to be eligible. So if you feel confident in your responses and that you can get that 75, then you've got a good chance of getting funded. So these just repeat the questions and then show you those points scoring as well. So if you want to just roll through each of these, it identifies the scoring for each of those multiple choice questions, what each answer option would be worth. Again, this is just for your reference. You don't have to fill this out, but our reviewers at the city and Civitas will be completing these for each organization. So it goes through each of the major sections. There's essentially one page for each of the 4 sections of the application. Okay, I'm going to stop the share now and open up that Excel file, which is the budget, just to show you that it is fillable and we've got formulas in it. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so you see the Excel, and we're aware of this little formatting issue here where it overlaps. We're going to clean that up before we post it tomorrow. But you will fill in the bottom here, and then it will automatically add up the formulas here for each of your funds requested. So you'll fill in the description of work, whether that's staff salaries, that's utilities, maybe that's rent, phone and internet at your office, etc. You would fill these out, the total project cost for the year, and then the funds requested for each of those expenses, and then identifying whether it's matching funds or donations in kind, how you will cover the balance of your expenses. Formulas at the bottom to total up, and then it auto populates up here in the summary. You'll fill out the agency name, the project name, and project type. Again, ESG or CDBG, and then what type under those 2 programs. So pretty straightforward here. Reminder that you need to do an application for each program. So if you want CDBG Public Services and CDBG Public Facilities, that would be 2 applications, and everything that's required for attachment has to be done and submitted with each application. Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and then we will open it up for questions here in just a moment. Bear with me. Thank you. Okay, a little more details on the matching funds. Again, for ESG, it's 100% match is required. So that can be in the form of actual cash that you have, general funds or donated funding that your organization receives. But you'll have to be able to document the source and the use of those funds to get credit for the match. And the city will require you each month, if you said, hey, we're going to match $50,000, so the project budget is $100,000. Every month, you're going to have to show us on ESG where you provided 100% match for the equal to the amount of ESG funding you're seeking reimbursement. On the CDBG side, again, it's not required, but if you're going for those points to be competitive in your application, then you'll have to be able to document those sources of funds in your application. And likewise, with each request for reimbursement, you'll have to be able to document that you've actually contributed those funds. So the match can be in the form of cash. It can be in-kind donation or donated resources. So supplies and materials, free office space or meeting space, etc. If you have questions about how you calculate that information, please ask, and we can help you with federal standards for calculating in-kind and donated materials. If you're doing match, if you're doing match, I just want to highlight here this the bottom bullet that needs to be included on your board resolution. So the board resolution template that we're providing just simply says that the board has authorized your submission. If you're seeking points, or in the case of ESG, you're required to, that specific amount of matching funds being committed has to be included in that resolution that your board is authorizing. So again, in my simple example a moment ago, ESG, you're matching with $50,000. You would identify that some of that is cash, some of that is in kind, and some of that is donated resources. Your board would identify that and authorize that specifically in the resolution. We've gone through the point scoring, but again, just 4 sections. Project description were 25. The 2 main pieces is showing us your agency's capacity to run the program and then adhere to financial standards required for federal funds. So that's 60% of your application. And then the statement of need is only 15. Minimum score, again, is 75 out of 100 to be eligible for funding. I showed you the application checklist, but here it is again in the PowerPoint. And again, all of this material will be posted tomorrow. We've gone through the resolution and the conflict of interest. Here's a little more clearly the persons covered and the conflicts prohibited. For those of you that might be concerned with familial or business relationships between your organization and the city or city council, please review this quickly and carefully. And contact us promptly if you feel like you might have a conflict between your organization. Once again, all board members, all senior staff, and all program staff have to complete the conflict of interest disclosure, and then you're going to submit all of this electronically, so you can scan those in and merge those together when you submit your application. So applications due 5 p.m. Thursday, August 22nd. Incomplete or late applications will not be accepted. And you're going to submit those to this email address, dbhdhousing@harrisburgpa.gov. Same email address can be used to submit questions between now and August 22nd. When staff receives your application, they're going to submit or respond with confirmation that the file has been received. I encourage you not to wait till 4:55 to try to submit this. Clearly there's a lot of documents that are going to need to be submitted. Some of you might be able to get them into a single PDF that's compressed or zipped, but it's likely that some of you will need to submit multiple emails. If that's the case, make it very clear that you're submitting email 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, whatever it takes. We understand there's a lot of files being submitted, but make it very clear so that we can see that all emails and all attachments have been received. What city staff will initially do in the first few days after receiving the applications is to make sure that all of the attachments and the requirements were included. If there are minor items missing, you may be contacted and given a very brief period to cure those minor issues. But if there are just incomplete and totally missing items, your application will be rejected for being incomplete. But if there are typos or inconsistencies or files didn't scan through clearly, again, minor deficiencies, you may be given an opportunity to correct. So you might want to take a quick picture of the screen there, or write that email address down one more time. So that's where you're going to submit, as well as submit any questions between now and the due date. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be creating an FAQ style document with all questions and responses. Of course, we'll remove any specifically identifying or confidential information that you might submit in your question. So we'll strip those down and make them generic, if you will, and provide those answers for everybody's benefit. So they'll be posted on the website every few days, or at least weekly, as we have new questions and responses. So I encourage you to check that site periodically to make sure you're staying up with any new information. Finally, for those of you that are new to these programs and might want some more information and background about what's eligible, I encourage you to use the HUD Exchange. This is HUD's page for all things, all their guidance, all the regulations for both programs, CDBG and ESG. And then we've also provided links here to the federal regulations for federal financial management, and then the CDBG regulations, and ESG regulations. I encourage you, before you seek these funds, to be familiar with the programs and the federal requirements. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop the share. And if you would like, we can start with questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Kyle and city staff if we've gone through. I think I'm looking in the chat, but if you'd like to type your question in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can do so. We can have questions that way.
Hey, Eric.
While I wait, go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to say, we do currently have one question that hasn't been answered in the chat. They're asking, can we use the 10% de minimis rate for indirect expenses?
Yes, so actually, to your benefit, federal guidelines as of October 1st, the 10% de minimis rate goes to 15% for indirect cost. And not only can you use that, I encourage all of you to use that. So include that in your budget for indirect cost. You can, if you're covering those yourselves, then you can get the benefit of including those indirects as match. Or if you'd like to seek reimbursement for indirect cost, include that on your budget as well. But yeah, great question. Thank you, whoever asked that. And the rate as of October 1st will be 15% for de minimis. So I encourage everyone to utilize that one way or the other. Absolutely. I think I'm caught up here. There's a question. The application to the link to the application in the chat. Yeah, it's just the DBDA, the department website. So yeah, Tamika, if you'll put the department website in the chat, that'd be helpful. Can matching funds be other grants? They can be other grants, but typically they cannot be other federal grants. Both the regulations for most federal grants.
All the addresses. Oops.
Thank you, Crystal. To answer the question about matching funds being other grants, typically federal grants can't match other federal grants, and that's the case with CDBG and ESG. So you can't get an ESG fund and then say that's going to match your ESG and vice versa. Or if you get funds from the state, typically the state funds need to be used elsewhere, wouldn't be used within Harrisburg because the city receives their own funds. But yeah, if you've got foundation grants or other non-federal grants, those can be used as match. Absolutely. What are the total funds available? I think I shared that at the beginning of the presentation. Let's see, I'll look right back real quick. We're looking at about 1.3 million in CDBG funds and just under 300,000 in ESG funds. The minimum request is $20,000. So we could have 10 plus organizations receive CDBG. Typically with ESG, there's only 3 or 4 organizations in the city that actually run those programs within the very specific guidelines. So ESG has very few applications just on that, on the nature of the program. But CDBG, I would not be surprised if we have 10 or 12 organizations funded, perhaps more, given the amount of funding. But again, just based on how many applications we receive. Ideally, if we have applications that are receiving 75 points or more for public services on the CDBG side, then we would attempt to fund everybody at the minimum, at least, and then see where we are with the budget from there. There's a question about affordable housing with CDBG funds. That's not an eligible use of CDBG funds to build new housing. So no, housing is not an eligible expense here for either program, and not for rehabilitation nor construction of affordable housing. The city has another program called the Home Program, and we have a separate application cycle for that. And those funds are entirely for affordable housing production. Can you apply for multiple applications for the same type, like two ESG applications or two CDBG supportive service applications? Generally, those would be one program, but I suppose if you have multiple programs you're seeking funding for, then yes, you could submit multiple applications. Kyle's posted in the chat the city website, and someone else has as well. There's a 2023 link for application for funding. That would not be correct. This is 2024 application is not posted yet, but Kyle has shared the website where it will be posted. There's a question about awarded funds from 2022 that have not been, grant agreements have not been signed. For anybody that applied and believes they were awarded funding in that 2022 cycle, staff will be in contact with you directly to discuss the status of your funds. Okay. I don't see any hands up. I'll give you a moment to raise your hand and ask a question, or to type in question. Yep. Question: when will funding begin? We anticipate funding starting with the new program year, which is October 1st, and typically the awards will be for 12 months. So in your budget, your program description, describe this from October 1st of 2024 to the end of September 2025. So we're looking for you to be able to run your program for that full program year. We understand some folks might have, in the case of a construction activity with CDBG, you know, maybe it's only a 2-month window, maybe it's not even that long. So that's understandable. And some of you might be seeking funding for a particular event. Maybe it's a summer camp type program, for example. So maybe your time frame would not be that full year. So that would be appropriate. But for the most part, people are looking for support running programs for a long period of time. And we're looking for that to be the full program year, which again is October 1st through September 30th. Okay, I don't see any questions. I don't necessarily want to keep us on any longer than we need to. For those of you that might have joined a little late, do make sure that in the chat you haven't typed in your organization name, the organization you're representing this morning. We have 3 more opportunities for the workshop, 1 more this afternoon, and then as well 2 virtual on August 6th. Again, you need not attend repeatedly. They're going to be basically the same information presented. But if you have questions, you're welcome to tune back in, or if you feel like other staff need to tune in to hear this information, you know, they're welcome to attend. You only need 1 certificate per organization. We just needed to make sure that each organization had at least 1 person attend the full workshop at least once to be eligible. So pretty basic there. Again, type in your organization that you're representing. We see your name, but attend your organization. And the meeting ID and password, if you'll register with Tamika for August 6th, she'll get you the invite login credentials for the August 6th meeting. Okay, and with that, I think we've answered all the questions. I see some folks are typing in their organization, so I won't hang up on us just yet, but I'll stop the recording. We thank you all for your time and all your hard work that you and your organization do for the residents of Harrisburg. We look forward to receiving your application and working with you throughout the next program year. Thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon.